Hello, I'm Tim Shoebridge. Welcome to this video. This is called Out of the Box Behringer UB-Xa. Here it is. It's out of the box. This is not an unboxing video. This is my very initial impressions about this synth. I received it in the post just yesterday. I've had no more than 1 hour to play around with it, so it really is my very initial impressions. I've got a few things I'd like to say about it. I know you've got lots of questions about it. I will follow up with another video later on once I've had a bit of time to get to know it a bit better. So it'll be quite brief. There won't be much in the way of music. There are plenty, I think, of examples of what it sounds like out there on the internet already. This is just my initial thoughts. If that's good enough for you, then great. Let's get on with it. That last microphone was a bit naff, wasn't it? I'm going to try this one, my trusty Zoom. Let's talk about the appearance of the synth, the interface, the build quality, things like that. While I've got this on my knee, it is actually very heavy. Build quality is brilliant, I would say. It's a solid metal construction. It does weigh quite a lot. Appearance is wonderful, actually. You know, with the photographs I've seen of it so far and the videos that I've seen of it so far on the internet, I haven't really been blown away by the look of it. Okay, you know, it looks fairly okay, but when you get it out of the box, it really does look very impressive. It's a really handsome synthesizer. I think it would make a great centerpiece in your studio. And yes, it looks like an Oberheim and it sounds like an Oberheim, and there's going to be a small minority of people who are going to get very angry over that. I can't help you if you're one of those people. All I can really say is there's so much shit going on in the world right now to get angry about, not something like this. Anyway, let's move on. User interface, it's so clearly laid out. It's really nice. We've got the knobs and lots of buttons. The knobs are all potentiometers apart from one, which is the little, I was going to point it out to you, but you can't see it. I'll give you a close-up of it. It's the little rotary encoder for sort of like data selection. It's actually a push type encoder. We've got the screen, the little LCD screen. It's a 2-line display. It really reminds me of so many Roland products. There really is very little menu diving with this particular synthesizer, so it's really no problem at all. The menu system is really logical, simple. You're not going to use it very much. The main reason why you're going to use that display is for selecting presets, and if you are going to build your own presets, then you're going to be using it for the mod matrix most of the time. Other than that, you're really not going to go into it very much at all. It's not a problem. There is a shift button. It's right here. There are lots of sort of like alternative sort of like uses for the buttons over the front panel here. But they're very well labeled. It's very clear. I haven't had any problems at all with it. I think the user interface is really good. If I've got one criticism, which I do, then it is actually the position of that display. It's over on the right hand side of the synthesizer, and this is a big synth, 61 note keyboard. You're going to sit in the middle when you're playing with it and when you're sort of building patches and playing the synth. And having that display over on the right hand side does cause issues in terms of what you can see. I mean, these displays are designed to be viewed at a certain angle, not off to the side. I'll try and show you with a close-up what I mean. But when I'm sitting in front of this synthesizer, I can't very easily read what's on the display. Changing the contrast doesn't help with this, and I'm constantly moving my head over to the right, changing my position in order to be able to see what's on the display as I'm flicking through presets and playing around with it. So I have a suggestion for you guys at Behringer, is to really, please think about utilizing musicians in the early stages of your product design. I think it really would help, and I mean that in the kindest way I can. Engineers are brilliant, but musicians are the ones that actually are going to be using this stuff. And I think it's, if we'd had that display in the middle of the synth, it would make a big difference. Anyway, that's my only criticism. Other than that, it's heavy, it's well built. Knob wobble, there's a little bit, but it's nothing to get your knickers in a twist about. No worse than many other synthesizers that I own. Interface fantastic. I'm not going to go into the sound engine in this video, I just don't have the time, but there's a few other things that I want to point out. So not only is the UB-Xa from Behringer a 16 voice all analog polysynth, and also of course heavily inspired by certain classic vintage synthesizers from the very early 1980s, but it's also a 61 note polyphonic aftertouch keyboard, and this is a really big thing. This is Behringer's very first polyphonic aftertouch keyboard, and it's also a 61 note keyboard, so it's joining the lofty ranks of the ASM Hydrasynth Deluxe and the Waldorf Quantum Mark II. Now, I haven't played either of those two keyboards that I've just mentioned, but I have played their 49 note versions, and the way that those polyphonic aftertouch keyboards work is quite different to the way that Behringer have implemented polyphonic aftertouch in their UB-Xa. Let me try and explain. So with the Waldorf and the ASM keyboards, there is a sort of a gentle transition, can I call it that, between the initial downward movement of the key and when polyphonic aftertouch takes over. There's no hard stop. Now, technically inside the keyboard there might be a very finite point where polyphonic aftertouch takes over, but in practice for me when I'm playing those keyboards, it is a gradual transition from initial pressure to aftertouch pressure. And this is a really good thing because it allows some incredible expressivity. However, on the flip side, it's an action that takes quite a lot of practice to master. I find that quite often as I'm playing, I'm pressing down too much on the keys. I don't want the polyphonic aftertouch to engage, but it does engage because I'm just a bit heavy-handed with the way that I play a lot of the time. Now, both of these keyboards, they have a whole load of different configuration options as to how to sort of like make that polyphonic aftertouch work for you. And if you have one of these keyboards, I really would recommend that you take the time to practice with it and play around with those settings and try and get some settings that work for you, because obviously we're all different in how we play. Now, the Behringer approach to polyphonic aftertouch is very different from those two keyboards. Their approach to polyphonic aftertouch is to really kind of emulate the feel and the action of a regular mono aftertouch keyboard. And by that, what I mean is that that initial down pressure that you have when you play any keyboard, there is a very hard stop. You can play really quite heavy on the UB-Xa keyboard and you will never be in any danger of accidentally triggering polyphonic aftertouch response. That polyphonic aftertouch response is after you've held down the key and then you have to give it some very direct pressure down to get that polyphonic aftertouch to work. Now, it's heavy pressure compared to those other keyboards that I mentioned, but it's not too bad at all. And actually, to be honest with you, I'm really very impressed with the action on this Polyphonic Aftertouch keyboard. It's very easy to control. It may not have the minute expressivity gains that those other keyboards I've mentioned have got, but it's really a very approachable Polyphonic Aftertouch keyboard, and I really like it a lot. I've gone through all the menu system on the UB-Xa, and I can't find any menu settings on configuring the action. I don't think there are any. Certainly I haven't found any, and I haven't found the need to configure it anyway. So I think that what Behringer have come up with is a very, very simple but effective design. Their Polyphonic Aftertouch keyboard really works very, very well. I think that anybody will be able to sit down and just start playing with it and enjoy it. And I almost forgot to tell you what you can actually use Polyphonic Aftertouch for with the UB-Xa's own synth engine. Well, it appears in the modulation matrix as a regular modulation source, which means you can modulate any of the destinations that are available in the mod matrix, and I think there's about 30 of them. Right, so in this particular part of the video, I'd like to talk about a feature. You could call it an issue, but I don't think it's an issue. I think at the end of the day, it's a design choice that Behringer have to make when they are basing their instrument on a vintage design, which works in a certain way, but they are bringing it into the modern world with Polyphonic Aftertouch. Let me just explain what I mean, because it did get me stumped, and I actually thought for a while that the Polyphonic Aftertouch was broken by synth. So that's why I'm going to mention it to you, explain what I'm talking about. Now, my favorite use of Polyphonic Aftertouch is to add vibrato. So that's, per note vibrato. So I can play some chords, get some nice gentle sounds going on, and then accentuate individual notes and add vibrato to those notes. That's how I like to use Polyphonic Aftertouch. It's the most common way that I like to use Polyphonic Aftertouch. Now, the UB-Xa has got an LFO, and just one, so it's a bit limited in that respect. That's the original design, okay? But it has also got a performance section. So like on those vintage synths of the 1980s, we've got this performance section here. I'll give you a close-up of this so you can see what I'm talking about. And as well as having the rather unique mod wheel or mod bender control and pitch bend control, we've got an LFO built into it. So I believe it's a global LFO. I think it certainly was on the original synthesizers, and it probably is here in the UB-Xa. However, this LFO, it may be global, but it's actually, you're able to affect it polyphonically. So you can apply it per note. So you can actually use it as a destination for Polyphonic Aftertouch. And that's what I've been showing you in the examples I've been playing so far. And I'll show it to you here in that screenshot I did of the mod matrix earlier, so you can see it's there as a destination performance LFO amount. So it's a really fantastic way of adding vibrato, because it doesn't interfere with the use of the main LFO for other things. It's a global LFO, so it's going to be affecting the pitch of both the oscillators exactly the same across the notes that you play, but you can apply it per note in the UB-Xa, which is brilliant. However, The thing that I didn't realize when I was starting to patch this synthesizer and save some presets is that when you save your preset, even though you can refer to the performance section and refer to this performance LFO in your mod matrix, the settings here in this performance section of the synth are not saved in your preset at all. I presume that's what was going on the original design of those Oberheim synths back in the early 80s, and it's what we have here with the UB-Xa. So if you just happen to have these switched off and come back to your preset later on, then it just won't work the way you expect it to. Now, I think it would be really great if Behringer with a firmware update could address this and save this if it's possible, if it's kind of wired in and could be done. I know that would be taking it away from the original Oberheim design, and this is why I call this section a design dilemma, because we have the original way of working, but we have more modern features added, like the Poly aftertouch keyboard, and it would be really nice to be able to save this settings here, this LFO, performance LFO settings. Just something for you to bear in mind when it comes to doing your own patching of the synth. And really, I do strongly encourage you to play around with it, not just play the presets, but actually patch it yourself. It is a huge amount of fun. So, atrophy, not a pleasant word. It means wasting away, the effects of aging, decay, deterioration. Actually, it's a very, very good way of describing the effect on a vintage synthesizer, why we love vintage synthesizers so much, because they don't sound like they're brand new. And I really do think that this feature in the UB-Xa is worth mentioning, because I think Behringer really have taken the whole idea of a vintage knob or a slop functionality. They've taken it to the next level. It's really showing some serious innovation on behalf of Behringer. So what they've done is they've decided on a whole different bunch of synthesizer parameters, basically, that do get affected by age, that we might want to adjust and add some sort of like randomness to on a per voice basis to achieve the kind of feel and sound of a vintage synthesizer. And that's what this Atrophy functionality is called. Now they've really taken this to the next level, because they've provided us with 8 different presets, sort of 8 different groups of settings that provide different types of vintage sound. So we've got 8 of them in total. Now these are the presets that come with the UB-Xa. These are the factory presets, but you can actually change these how you like if you want to. And if we look at that, there are actually a huge number of different parameters that you can set. Now, I can only guess at what some of these are. Some of them are obvious and some of them are less obvious, but there are 40 in total. So you can actually really sort of like get down to some serious details on how you want to add some vintage aging to the sound of your UB-Xa. I really do think this is pretty damn comprehensive. I've never seen anything like this in any other synthesizer. So you have got complete control, if you want to, over those 8 different Atrophy settings, and you can just apply them to whatever presets you want to. You can listen to a preset, apply different settings. And these settings can really, be used not just for aging, but for very interesting effects. So you could set up an atrophy setting, which is purely adding detune, whereas you could have a different atrophy setting, which is playing around with the lengths of the envelopes and getting some interesting variation that way. Whatever you want to do. This is an interesting one. This is my favorite of all the 40 settings. OB-8 quirks. We can only imagine what kind of things this is doing behind the scenes. But anyway, I think it's a really, really innovative and interesting and powerful feature of the UB-Xa, and it really does prove to me that Behringer are taking this very, very seriously. They're going into the details really of how those vintage synthesizers work, how they sound, and giving us every opportunity we can to replicate it. So that's it, that's all I've got time for this video. A very, very brief initial look at the Behringer UB-Xa. I hope there's been something in this video that is informative, useful, entertaining, whatever. I'm very, very sorry about the sound. My whole studio is in a state of disarray. I've been pulling it apart. Nothing works, nothing's plugged in, so I'm having to use mics like this right now. Hopefully I'll get back to normal very, very soon, and hopefully I'll get an opportunity to spend some time and do a far more in-depth video of the UB-Xa in the future. Until then, as always, thank you very, very much for watching.